So there is a bill that is coming that I think is really worth paying attention to, okay? And this is it's known as the Online Harms Act. And this bill, I think C-63, has been going through legislation for quite a while, many years, with a lot of pushback, especially from legal entities. So really, this was a bill that was designed to tackle hate speech online, harmful speech online, whatever you want to call it. And what I've noticed is that this bill is absolutely progressing right now and has a very strong likelihood of being passed. And one of the reasons, if you look at it, it was bundled to look as if it is a bill that is meant to protect children, and also in situations where you have deep fake porn and things like that. Which seems like, well, who wouldn't want to protect children on the internet? And they are under 18, it makes sense. And the bill, has been reshaped to make sure that that's what happens, that it looks like it's a bill that is meant to really protect children. However, if you look at the bill a little bit closer, it has a lot more going on there than just, protecting children. So, for example, the plan is to create a digital safety commission that would regulate social media companies and establish that would hear complaints from Canadians. And also, companies would have to create safety plans to ensure that harmful content, is minimized, essentially. And of course, there's different types of online content that's going to define as harmful. So anything from terrorism material, so violent content seems fine, to child abuse, sex abuse images and videos and things like that that were being shared without consent. That seems reasonable, and they want to be able to give the regulators the power to fine companies that allow the posting of such content. So that would, basically push these companies to moderate more carefully. And so that seems somewhat reasonable. However, it seems like there's a lot more sort of bundled into this bill than that. So I'm just going to go over some of the things that points in the bill. So the summary. So I'm looking at the bill summary. It is Bill C-63. They're doing the first reading of this bill February 26, 2024. And so it's the Online Harms Act. And it says the purpose is, amongst other things, promote the online safety of persons in Canada, reduce harms caused to persons in Canada as a result of harmful content online, and ensure that operators of social media services in respect of which that act applies are transparent and accountable with respect to their duties under that act. So already we can see from reading this, it's not really as focused on protecting children as the bill is being portrayed to be. So number one, so one of the things they're going to do is, as I mentioned, create a digital safety commission that's going to monitor social media, make sure they're accountable, transparent, et cetera, et cetera. They're also going to, so a lot of it is focusing on just safety on these platforms. But again, like, how do you determine what content is safe? I mean, if we're talking about illegal content like sexual child content, obviously that's illegal. And there absolutely should be some enforcement mechanism of it and some accountability. But it sounds like there's a lot more to it than that. So it allows people to make complaints. So in respect to content that sexually victimizes a child or a survivor, that seems fine. And then, but then we get to things like hate crime offenses, but motivated by hatred based on certain factors. Now this is where it gets complicated. So again, what they did with this bill is they bundle it with something that I think a lot of people will agree with, providing policies and guidelines and resources and fines for enforcing, making sure that there is no child inappropriate content to do with children. So want to protect children. That makes sense. But within that, they bundled so many other things. So they have now things to do, hate crime offenses, which is really difficult to prove, because how are you going to say that something is a hate crime that's motivated by hatred? Sometimes you can figure that out explicitly, but obviously it's just very difficult to identify what hate speech might be. And this is where we're getting into that territory of hate speech. So it's create a recognizance, I don't know, to keep the peace relating to hate propaganda and hate crime offenses. Like, okay, so what's hate propaganda? And then it says, okay, so the next thing it says, C, define hatred for the purposes of new offense and the hate propaganda offenses. So the bill, I guess, or this is going to actually focus on defining hatred, which is incredibly difficult, which is why for many years they had legal organizations kind of debating this bill and fighting this bill, because hate speech is just such a difficult term to define, because it can be in the eye of the beholder. And look, most reasonable people will agree about like 90% of what hate speech is, but then there's that 10% that is going to be very hotly debated, even by reasonable people. And then they want to increase the maximum sentences for the hate propaganda offenses. Again, hate propaganda. So propaganda, what, spreading hate, but propaganda, is it false? Is it true? And this phrasing is very vague and being weaponized, essentially. So what we have, Part 3 amends the Canadian Human Rights Act to provide that it is discriminatory practice, communicate or cause to be communicated hate speech by means of the internet or any means of communication in contexts in which the hate speech is likely to foment detestation or vilification of an individual or group of individuals on the basis of a prohibited ground of discrimination. Yeah, that's interesting. And it says here that part of it is going to be to clarify the types of internet services covered by the act, simplify the mandatory notification process set out by Section 3, require that the transmission data would be provided with a mandatory notice when it comes to child pornography, extend period of preservation of data related to an offense, extend the limitation period of prosecution of offense, and add certain regulation making powers. So, we're just kind of briefly going over it. But it is an interesting thing, and I think this is where we really need to keep an eye on it, because it's clearly a sneaky bill, because it is addressing something rather important, ensuring that victims of sexual crimes, in particular children, are indeed protected. Very important. But they smuggled other things into this bill. So what I think they're doing is trying to make it really difficult for people to strike it down, because then it looks like they don't support protecting children, where in fact they might not be inclined to let this bill pass because it has, a whole bunch of other things related to, quote unquote hate speech. So definitely a bill worth keeping an eye on, and there is a very strong likelihood that it's going to pass from what I've read. So it's quite concerning. Like, why wouldn't the government just, push for a bill that solely focuses on safety of, sexual crime victims, children, as opposed to bundling it with hate speech? So keep an eye out, and let me know if there are other disturbing bills that you've noticed in recent times. There's a whole lot of them being passed, unfortunately.